The key was we actually didn't know how to do what we were trying to do. We had no idea how to do the cleanups at nuclear waste sites. The technology just simply didn't exist. And so we had to create the technology. We had all these researchers, and then we would transfer it over to actually accomplish the mission. And that really got me into tech transfer.
Welcome to the Transfer Files, inside the world of federal innovation. This is your insider's look at how federal laboratories bring groundbreaking technologies to market. I'm your host, Andrea Nelson. In every episode, we'll bring you insights and expertise from throughout the world of tech transfer. My guest today is Paul Zielinski, Executive Director of the Federal Laboratory Consortium for Technology Transfer, or the FLC. Paul worked in the federal government for decades as a scientist, engineer, and manager, and he's been involved with the FLC for more than 10 years, first as a volunteer and now as a full-time employee. Paul also has an encyclopedic knowledge of the FLC and tech transfer history. As the FLC celebrates its 50th anniversary this year, Paul and I talked about how the consortium was formed, how it evolved in the past 5 decades, and where it's going from here.
Paul Zielinski, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
This is a big year for the FLC. It's been 50 years since the consortium was formed in 1974, and we'll get to that history in a minute. But the story really starts decades earlier in 1945, when Vannevar Bush, the director of the government's Office of Scientific Development, submitted this report to President Truman titled Science, the Endless Frontier. This was at a time when government research and development was in high gear because World War II was going on. So tell us about how Bush's letter introduced the concept of federal tech transfer.
Actually, it's a really brilliant letter. He lays out in great terms how the infrastructure that was built for this federal laboratory system that won the war should be converted over to win the peace. So changing from this whole machinery and all of the brilliant minds that were put in place to do all of these huge advances in science that really ended up on the battlefield in World War II, and changing that over to civilian applications and actually making new products that were going to make its way into the marketplace. And so it envisions this idea of technology transfer, of how we can use the system of laboratories to advance science, to make new products, to keep our leadership in the world in terms of economic development and technology development. So it's a brilliant letter. It's actually a great read if you haven't read it before. It's actually fairly long, but it lays out a great case for actually using these laboratories as a way to springboard the economy, which is technology transfer.
So technology transfer is really a natural extension of a lot of what the government has already been doing for a long time.
It is. In its core, technology transfer is actually completing the mission. It's great to do the research, but if you don't actually move that out of the bench and into something that people can use, the people in the country, the taxpayers, don't really reap the benefit and the value from their investment in research. So it actually is the core of it's the completion of that mission. It's the core of the mission to get it out there, not just to do the research, but make a difference.
And even for as natural an extension as it is, it's taken a lot of pieces to be put into place. So that leads us to the FLC being established in 1974. How did the FLC start and grow in the early years?
Sure, great question. So it's actually an interesting one. We can go even back a little bit further. Before there was a Federal Laboratory Consortium, the Department of Defense laboratories actually got together and formed the Defense Laboratory Consortium. So it really wasn't a formal act or anything. It was just a group of people with a like mission that decided they were going to get together and they were going to start working across both the services, the Army, Navy, Air Force, as well as across the laboratories, because they were all trying to do similar things. Now, a lot of the tools we have now didn't exist back then. A lot of the things we commonly talk about in tech transfer didn't exist, but they were still trying to complete this mission. Now, for the Defense Department, it's very clear. They want to buy stuff. They're going to invent things at the laboratory, they're going to make it in the marketplace, and then they're going to bring it back in so they can procure it. But then in 1974, this is the formation of the Federal Laboratory Consortium, because at that point, the Department of Defense invited all the other agencies in. So they said, this is a great thing. Why don't we get all of the other folks involved in this thing? And that actually then you switch over from defense laboratories to just to all federal laboratories, and hence the beginning of the Federal Lab Consortium. Now, it's interesting. In the early years, it's actually not a formal type of an organization. It's actually just a group of people that decided that they're going to work together and they're going to communicate with each other and try to advance this tech transfer mission. So it's actually a lot of personal commitment and endeavor that goes into forming this entity that we call the FLC.
Absolutely. People like Harold Metcalf and George Lindstedt are among some of those people who were pushing and pulling things forward in those early years. But after several years, they start getting some help when 3 key laws were passed. The Stevenson-Wydler Technology Innovation Act in 1980. A few months later, the Bayh-Dole Act, also in 1980. And in 1986, the Federal Technology Transfer Act. How did those policies shape the landscape?
So these are huge steps. As I said, in the early years, and again, this goes a lot of credit to the people that formed the FLC, because these laws didn't exist. These laws fundamentally changed and defined what we call tech transfer today. So Stevenson-Wydler actually requires that agencies have what we call an Office of Research and Technology Applications, an ORTA. Crazy name, but that's actually the name of the tech transfer office is officially under this act. So they just said, everybody, if you have more than 200 scientists and engineers working in the laboratory, you must have this tech transfer function. It actually assigns the tech transfer mission to every scientist and an engineer in the laboratory. So it's not just a matter of, just the tech transfer office have this mission. Actually, everybody does. And this goes back again to this brilliant Vannevar Bush idea of, we want to complete the mission. We want to use the science in order to transfer it into the public domain. And so that makes it not just the responsibility of tech transfer folks, but everybody. That's part of the mission of the lab. So that's really fundamental in terms of setting up this mission of tech transfer in Stevenson-Wydler. And remember, back in the 1980s, we're competing with Japan. We've got all these imports coming in for the first time, and it's, flooding the marketplace. So we're trying to really be competitive worldwide. And this is Stevenson-Wydler then is taking that mission, that vision earlier and saying, we're going to do this. We're going to actually make it a mission for the laboratories. Now, the Bayh-Dole Act actually comes a few months later. Bayh-Dole actually then formalizes this authorization to say, laboratories, you can manage your intellectual property. So you can now get patents or trademarks. You can license these things. We can meet businesses where they work. We can transfer the rights for these inventions like other companies can, only from the government. Now, that happened before, but it really wasn't clear until Bayh-Dole came around. And of course, on the contractor lab side, now the original Bayh-Dole Act was a little bit strange in this, but it really opens the door for contractor labs also then to do tech transfer, because now they can elect property rights. Instead of it all flowing back to the government, they can actually do it themselves, which sounds crazy in a way, but it's not when you think about it, because again, it's not the government doesn't make stuff. Companies make stuff. So if it comes back to the government, it just sits there. We actually want to get it out there, and the faster, the better. Then, of course, you get the Federal Technology Transfer Act, FTTA, comes around in 1986. And this is sort of the companion piece. This is like, okay, this is great. You can patent stuff. That's sort of at the end. What about the beginning? And so one of the things that this actually does is sets up public-private partnerships, things we call cooperative research and development agreements, CRADAs. Brilliant tool. They actually are very super flexible, but they actually form this legal partnership between an external entity and the federal side to actually accomplish research and get it done. And so it's a wonderful piece of legislation that actually sets this in motion and also, of course, formalizes then the FLC. So with the FTTA, you get the official authorization that says there will be a Federal Laboratory Consortium, and these are the rules, and this is the way this is going to operate. And so it's no longer just a random group of people that decided that they want to work together, but it's actually required in law.
Over the last 40 years, the FLC Awards have become some of the most prestigious honors in technology transfer, recognizing exemplary people, teams, and collaborations. Could you talk a little more about how the FLC Awards have evolved and why it's important to celebrate the work being done and the people doing it?
I think one of the biggest things with the awards program is this idea of recognizing excellence in this field. We talk about how important it is, but the awards program is actually where we start saying, this is the type of thing we want to see more of. let's hold this up as an example to others to emulate. And so what's really important to the laboratories, because, technology transfer is an interesting thing. If you let it just sort of sit there, then maybe people won't be as engaged. By giving these awards, by awarding excellence, you actually motivate people. You call forth more technology transfer actually in the labs by recognizing some of the things and holding those up as great processes or great examples for people to follow. And it's grown over the years. A couple different things. One of the things, for example, we now give a Laboratory Director of the Year award. Now, that started several years ago. But, the idea was if you want excellence, if you want to create an ecosystem for tech transfer to grow, then recognize that, award that. And so we've added those types of awards that, again, build on the characteristics that we think are important in technology transfer. So one of the things that's actually interesting about the awards, too, is one of our most prestigious awards is the Harold Metcalf Award. And actually, if you look back to that question about the history of the FLC, he's actually one of those people that really really put his own career on the line to move this consortium from the Defense Laboratory Consortium to the Federal Laboratory Consortium, and then finally get it to put into law. And so we actually honor one of our biggest awards is the Harold Metcalf Award, which actually is awarded to an individual that's gone above and beyond in excellence in the technology transfer field.
And how is the FLC celebrating its 50th golden anniversary this year?
Well, it's a big year, so we want to make sure we have a big celebration. So we've got a lot of different things we're trying to roll out during the year. Of course, one of our big events, and it still is our big event even in the 50th anniversary, is our national meeting. So this year, if you're going to go big, you go to Dallas. So we're going to be in Dallas, Texas, in April of 2024. And in fact, we've got such a big thing planned. The day before our meeting is actually a total solar eclipse. And so we can't get much bigger than that. But we actually are trying to, again, some of the history of the FLC and trying to remember sort of where we've been in order to set up where we're going to be going. Mm-hmm. And that's really important to communicate as we sort of advance in the years and people kind of come in and they go out. We actually want to make sure we capture all of that. And so we're trying to do a few different things. We've got a timeline we're putting up on the website to sort of recognize the history of the organization, as well as having some special events throughout the year to sort of celebrate the 50 years of FLC.
And I will say, as far as that timeline goes, the history that we've touched on is just the tip of the iceberg that we've talked about today.
It is. There's a lot more there. So it really is. There's a lot to take in, a lot of different people that have contributed.
And switching gears a little bit to your own career and trajectory, you have been in federal tech transfer for some time, including as the co-chair of the National Science and Technology Council Lab to Market Subcommittee, Director of Technology Partnerships Office at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, as well as positions at the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Energy. But you have an MBA with a specialization in entrepreneurship, along with your degrees in civil engineering and biology. So were you always drawn to the intersection of science and business?
I think at its core, for myself, I'm a problem solver. So a lot of this comes to the idea of trying to figure out how do you get to the solution. So for me, actually, I started my career actually in the Army. When I got out of the Army, I went actually, one of the things going into the Army, I had a biology degree. And so, well, what do? You end up as the nuclear biological chemical officer for your unit, almost always as a natural delegation of authority. But one of the things that actually did for me was made me into a first responder and actually being a hazardous waste person. So I actually got out of the military and got into nuclear waste cleanup. Super fun for Department of Energy sites, which I know that doesn't sound like tech transfer, but back then, back in the 80s, we actually formed this new group, environmental management, that was brand new. And the key was we actually didn't know how to do what we were trying to do. We had no idea how to do the cleanups at nuclear waste sites. The technology just simply didn't exist. And so we had to create the technology. We had all these researchers, and then we were transferred over to actually accomplish the mission. And that really got me into tech transfer. So they sort of moved over to EPA, which is an interesting thing. There's the law is parallel with Superfund and technology transfer. But the idea, again, going over to EPA then was the Superfund cleanup, same kind of a thing. We're creating the actual technologies and deploying them into the field to accomplish the mission. So rolling into the tech transfer office, actually that became part of the same organization, which I was leading at EPA. Then eventually moving back over to NIST, as you noted. So that was more of not only running the technology transfer office at NIST, but also taking on this larger policy role. So it's been a really interesting kind of a career, I suppose. In a lot of ways, it sort of look like, yes, I guess I'm getting older. But at the same time, it's been interesting. It's one of these things in technology transfer, we kind of look at it as you don't really plan it. You sort of just end up there.
And that, what you just said about what technology transfer looked like when you were at the EPA and the Department of Energy, that just speaks to how much it evolves and what kinds of technology is being transferred and probably how it's being transferred.
It does. It makes a big difference where you are because particularly in the federal side, it's very mission oriented. Every agency has its mission. They're trying to get to accomplishing that mission. There's always little twists. However, what's nice is there is also this base. So as we talked about some of those key laws, they're used in different ways, but they generally have the same kind of authorities. And so people can use them and apply them to actually accomplish what the agency is trying to accomplish.
And you've been involved with the FLC for many years as well as an agency representative at both EPA and the Department of Commerce, host agency representative, chair of the executive board, and now as the FLC's executive director. Looking back, what were the FLC's major priorities and accomplishments of the past decade?
So the past decade's been really a year of growth. When you look back, I'm going to go a little bit farther back, but it's interesting. By the time you get to that 1986 law, the board and its structure was already pretty much set, and it really didn't change until 2020. So in 2020, we actually realigned the FLC board. So we actually took this idea of promote, educate, and facilitate and put it right into the bylaws so that we're actually operating on this new concept. A lot of credit to John Dement, who had the vision and the foresight to really push this in. We had a huge vote and we updated everything. And so we're still operating under that today, which has really moved us forward and actually realigned our different activities underneath these huge pillars so that we can actually deliver products to our customers.
Excellent. At this point, what are the FLC's main goals for the next 5 to 10 years?
So really, we're going to be expanding a lot on what we've been doing, of course, looking at what's been successful and really launching into the future. We've had tremendous turnout for some of our different events. We've launched some new things. We've had great turnout for our webinars. We had a record for our national meeting, which is wonderful. Last year over in Cleveland, we've launched new showcases for laboratories. We've done more tech events. We're trying to really move in this next year to really delivering more in terms of tools and services, and even doing a little bit more of like these reverse pitches where we bring in companies to talk about what they're looking for. Again, trying to get technology transfer offices something to chew on, a little bit more help them along the way with some of finding their customers and their mission, which we can do from the FLC looking across. Because, again, a lot of the companies out there, they don't know what they're looking for, and they really don't know where to find it. The government's so big. So that's where I think the FLC really can help is sort of that cross-agency space.
More broadly, in the world of federal tech transfer, what do you see as the biggest challenges we're facing now and in the coming years?
In terms of so it's an interesting thing in terms of our current challenges. A lot of it comes from COVID. When we started, we talked about the Vannevar Bush and World War II and how that really changed the world and really put in motion all these laboratories. COVID, it's not World War II, but it actually had a really significant change in our lives. We moved much more into this work from home online environment. We've had tremendous growth in terms of the numbers of people being able to attend our online events. And that's been absolutely great. Like I said, we were also, had a great turnout for our national meeting, which was also great. So COVID's going to really change the way we operate. So even though that's probably the big, launched many new things, the technology and the ability for people to work from home and take in their things online really changed the world. So we're in that mode. The downside, in some respects, is, of course, losing that personal touch. Mm-hmm. When I came to tech transfer, a lot of what the FLC had to offer is actually meeting your peers, like knowing, being part of the community. And that's really important and special about the FLC and technology transfer in general. So, that's one of the things we don't want to lose by just all being online. It's nice to see people online, but you don't really get to know them. You really get to know people when you meet them in line getting food or, breaking bread, that kind of idea. So I think we've got to balance these two things and take advantage of the tech changes and the ability to do all these things in COVID and reach this larger audience, but still not losing that personal touch.
And tech transfer has been called a contact sport for just that reason. But now maybe virtual offers more points of contact in sort of a different way.
In different ways. I mean, it's interesting. For companies, they have a lower bar to enter. You know, if you ask a company to come to an event, they have to travel. There's an expense. Now they can show up online. It's actually relatively easy to bring in some partners too. So we've seen great growth in those areas. But like you said, it's a lot different when you just turn that computer off at the end and can walk away. So I think that's one of those areas that we really have to work on.
And what are the biggest strengths that you see that the T2 community has as it forges ahead and faces some of these challenges?
Like I said, I think the biggest advantage that we have as a community is this sense of actually having a community in tech transfer. We actually work across agencies. That's what the FLC is founded in. That's what we're all about. And this is, again, but what we don't want to lose by doing everything online. It's nice that we can do it online, but actually, you know, I know in my career, I know a lot of people across agencies simply because I know them from FLC meetings. You run into them, you talk to them, you get to know them. You get to know what they're working on, compare it to what you're working on. It's not the same watching people. It's not, you know, I don't know people just because I watch a TV show, don't know any of the actors. And it's the same thing kind of on a screen. You really don't get to know people personally, but you do at a lot of the different events with the FLC. So we don't want to lose that personal touch. We want to keep all of this together in a community, and that is our strength. Actually, our cross-agency community is actually the strength and the greatest part of the FLC.
And technology transfer is such a dynamic sort of field ecosystem that I'm sure some people get out of bed in the morning and they're excited to pursue this mission for the public good, and others really like the problem solving or the connecting people. What is it that drives you in tech transfer?
I think for me, as I said earlier, I'm a problem solver. For me, I like to see what is it that we can't do now and how do we get that done? And I think that really is what excites me about this whole field of tech transfer. And what's really pulled me into the whole field of tech transfer is just that sense of accomplishment of there's this void and you're filling the void. I might not be doing the research, but I'm helping to move many different things out of these laboratories and over and making them products that are available. And I take a lot of pride actually in looking at some of these things that, like, you know, you see them in a store, it's like, you know what, I know exactly where that came from. And there's actually a great sense of accomplishment in that. So it's a wonderful thing. And actually that's what really drives me in tech transfer.
Paul Zielinski, Executive Director of the FLC, thank you again for talking to us today. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to the Transfer Files, your insider's look at federal tech transfer. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected for more episodes exploring how hundreds of government laboratories and countless industry partners are driving innovations that shape our lives.